Chapter 6. Departures. The days in Cerulea's rest unfurled like silk banners in the wind. Sunlight spilled across white sand each morning, the horizon gleaming so blue it blurred into dream. The air always smelled of salt and citrus, mingling with the perfume of flowers that clung to the balconies and fountains. Everywhere was laughter, children darting through plazas with bright shells in hand, vendors crying out their wares, sweetbreads dripping with honey, fish pulled still twitching from the sea, wine poured as though the island feared running dry. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Izzi's shoulders loosened. She let herself swim in the crystal shallows until schools of tiny fish wove around her like ribbons of silver. She walked the plazas at Kaelen's side, trading half-hearted barbs while he sampled every meat skewer and flatbread offered to him. And every evening, Horian dragged them somewhere new. A tavern with music that shook the rafters, a cliffside trail where lanterns glittered like a second sky, or some hidden cove he swore only he knew about. At first, Izzi rolled her eyes, certain she'd tire of his antics, but more than once she caught herself smiling when she thought no one looked, her ears twitching pink at the sound of his booming laugh. Kaelen noticed, of course, though he said nothing, just hid his amusement behind the rim of his cup. Still, she knew it couldn't last. On the morning of their departure, the spell began to break. The gates of Cerulea's rest bustled with noise not of leisure but of business. A caravan of traders assembled, wagons creaking under bolts of silk, crates of dried fish, jars of oil sealed with wax. Oxen pawed at the dirt, snorting steam into the cool dawn. Guards adjusted their armor, eyes already scanning the road north. Izzi pulled on her own washed leathers, familiar weight settling over her shoulders like an old truth. Her twin daggers slipped back into their sheaths at her hips, steel glinting faintly in the sunrise. The silks of last night, soft and shimmering, felt like some other woman's memory. Beside her, Kaelen tugged at the strap of his greatsword, the massive blade resting easy across his back. His washed tunic and cloak smelled faintly of rosemary soap, but the scars along his arms reminded anyone watching what kind of man walked among them. Horian, of course, looked as though he had been born to straddle the line between adventurer and peacock. He wore bright linen, open at the chest, a sash wound carelessly around his hips. His hair shone in the sunlight, his grin already flashing as he helped traders load crates and flirted with every second passerby. Yet when his eyes found Izzi, they softened briefly, as if he too felt the weight of leaving paradise behind. The three of them stood at the edge of the crowd, the last of the salt wind brushing their faces. Izzi glanced back once, the fountain, the whitewashed walls, the lanterns still strung across the streets, and exhaled. "Back to the road," she murmured. Kaelen grunted his agreement. Horian clapped them both on the shoulders, loud enough to draw stares. Back to the world. And straight into its mouth, no doubt. But for now, forward. The caravan creaked into motion, wheels crunching over the packed dirt road, banners of bright cloth fluttering in the breeze. Izzi fell into step between Kaelen and Horian, the laughter of Cerulea's rest already fading behind her. Ahead loomed the shadowed spine of mountains, sharp against the sky, waiting. The caravan wound its way north like a rattling serpent, wagons groaning under crates, wheels crunching over dirt that slowly gave way to stone. The sea breeze thinned as the hours stretched, replaced by the cool bite of inland wind, the scent of pine drifting down from the distant peaks. In the last wagon, nestled among sacks of grain and bolts of cloth, Izzi slept with her head tipped lightly against Kaelen's shoulder. Her braid had loosened in the jostling, strands of copper-streaked hair spilling across her cheek. Every so often the wagon hit a rut, and her scarred lip twitched with a half-muttered word, but Kaelen stilled himself, letting her weight rest easy on him. Horian lounged opposite, long legs stretched carelessly across the planks, hands laced behind his head. For once his voice wasn't carrying above the caravan. It was quiet, waiting, the only sound the groan of wood and the creak of the oxen's harness. Kaelen broke the silence first, voice low so as not to wake her. "What kind of trouble are we walking into?" Horian's eyes opened, green flecked with gold, and for a heartbeat the grin was absent. "The villagers said people vanish on the mountain trail, gone without a trace. Hunters, travelers, even a few caravans like this one." He shifted upright, resting his elbows on his knees. "No one's body ever found, just the screams, cut off sharp. Then nothing but feathers." Kaelen's brow furrowed. Feathers. Rumor is, Horian said, his tone carrying that dangerous weight of possibility. A griffin haunts the cliffs, comes down in the night, carries folk off like sheep in a wolf's teeth. The wagon jolted over a stone. Izzi stirred, her head shifting on Kaelen's shoulder but didn't wake. Kaelen's hand flexed against his knee. And you believe it? Horian tilted his head, eyes narrowing toward the jagged skyline rising in the distance. The peaks were black against the paling sky, sharp as a crown of knives. I've heard stranger truths. For a while, neither spoke. The oxen trudged on, the mountains looming closer with each turn of the wheels. The wagon creaked to a slower rhythm as the road leveled. Smoke curled against the twilight sky, faint pinpricks of lantern light flickering through the trees ahead. The scent of pine gave way to hearthfire and cooking stew, the sound of dogs barking faintly over the rumble of wheels. Kaelen shifted, glancing at Izzi still dozing on his shoulder. With a gentleness that sat strangely against the scars on his arms, he gave her a small nudge. We're here. Her lashes fluttered, violet-gray eyes catching the glow of the last sun. She yawned wide, stretching her arms over her head before rubbing the heel of her palm against her lip scar. Saints, how long was I out? Horian's voice boomed from across the wagon, his grin bright enough to chase shadows, long enough to miss me singing half the journey. Glad to have you back with us, Izzi. She rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged despite herself. They climbed down from the wagon into the cool breath of evening. The town huddled in the cradle of the mountain's roots, cobbled streets winding between steep-roofed houses, their shutters drawn tight. Though lanterns lit the square, the mood was subdued. The people moved with hushed voices, eyes often darting toward the peaks rising black and jagged above them. At the head of the caravan, a man waited. Broad-shouldered, though age had bent him some, hair silvering at the temples, a heavy mantle of fur drawn around his shoulders. His eyes lit when he spotted Horian striding forward. "Hail!" the man rumbled, pulling him into a rough embrace. "By the gods, Chief Orvin!" Horian barked, gripping him back. "I thought this place would have eaten you alive by now!" Orvin chuckled low, though the sound held weariness. He pulled back, his gaze shifting to Izzi and Kaelen. "You've brought company." "My best," Horian said, almost solemn now. "They'll serve you well." Orvin's smile thinned. "It's not just service I need, Horian. It's vengeance." His voice dropped, the lantern light catching the deep lines around his eyes. "My son. He was taken 3 nights past. No body, no sign, only feathers in the trail. They say it was the griffin. They all say it." Silence pressed close for a moment. Even Horian's grin faltered. Orvin exhaled, steadying himself, then clapped Horian's arm once more. "The inn will see to you. Tell the keeper your stay is covered. Old debts still mean something here." Horian nodded, clasping his hand firm. "We'll find what hunts you, Orvin. You have my word." The chief gave a tired smile, then turned back toward the longhouse at the far end of the square, shoulders bowed by more than years. Izzi's hand drifted unconsciously to the hilt of one dagger, her ears twitching at the hush of the villagers nearby. Kaelen's face was carved stone, unreadable. "Come," Horian said, his voice dropping low. "Let's see our beds. Tomorrow we begin." The square was quieter than Izzi liked, lanterns burning low as if even flame feared to draw too much attention. The people gave them sidelong glances as they passed, quick and measuring, before ducking back into doorways. Kaelen fell in at Horian's side, his voice low but steady. "You said there'd be coin. Chief didn't mention a thing." Horian smirked, digging into the folds of his sash. "Oh, he wouldn't. Pride, grief, it tangles a man's tongue. But don't worry, Kael." He produced a slip of parchment and slapped it into the warrior's hand. "He's good for it." Kaelen unfolded it, eyes scanning the ink. His brows lifted, the mask of his face cracking. He passed it over. Izzi's violet-gray eyes widened as she read. The bounty written there was more than either of them had seen promised in years, enough to buy freedom from the road for months, maybe longer. "By the saints," she whispered. Her fingers brushed the parchment as though afraid it might vanish. "All this, for one beast?" Horian grinned, wide and bright, but his eyes were serious in the lantern light. "People pay dearly when fear eats their homes, and if it's a griffin, they'll pay even more to see its wings broken." He flicked the parchment back from Izzi's hand with a flourish, tucking it into his sash once again. Trust me, this one's worth our time. Kaelen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Izzi glanced once more toward the looming black silhouette of the mountains, unease prickling at her skin. The inn's lanterns glowed just ahead, promising warmth, food, and perhaps answers. The inn loomed at the far end of the square, its lanterns a little brighter than the rest of the town, as if it was doing its best to fight off the shadow of the mountains. The sign above the door, carved in wood bleached pale by years of sun and frost, creaked faintly in the wind. Inside, the air was warmer, heavier with smoke and spiced stew. Voices murmured low around tables, men and women bent close over mugs. Even laughter, where it came, was muted, strained, as though the mountain's shadow had crept in here too. Horian clapped Kaelen on the back with a booming laugh. "Come on, Stoneface, let's find us rooms before you grow moss." He turned his grin on Izzi. "Get us something to drink, will you?" "I'll see what I can do," she said, stepping aside. "Rum." Horian barked after her, drawing a few startled looks from the quiet patrons. "The darker the better." Izzi rolled her eyes but didn't slow her stride. She slipped toward the bar, weaving between tables, the air thick with the mingling scents of sweat, leather, and roasted meat. And that was when she saw him. He leaned against the bar with the ease of someone who knew how to command a room without trying. A half-elf, tall and built broad across the shoulders, lean muscle visible even beneath the black shirt he wore open at the throat. His hair was dark, catching the lantern light in faint streaks of bronze, tied loosely at the nape. His eyes, striking green, sharp as glass, lifted from his cup just as hers caught him, pinning her in place. His wrists and fingers gleamed with rings and bangles of varying metals, each one etched with marks she didn't recognize. Bandages wound his left arm from the base of his fingers all the way up beneath the sleeve, stark white against his skin. His left still, just visible in the lamplight, dark runes curled across his bandage, inked deep as though they had grown there rather than been written. They pulsed faintly, alive in a way that made her skin prickle. And then, peculiar, impossible, her eyes snagged on the cuff at his ear. Silver, the exact same design as her own. Her stomach flipped. Twin broadswords rested against the bar beside him, their hilts worn smooth, their edges cared for with near reverence. He stood close enough to touch them with ease, though he didn't need to. His presence alone was weapon enough. Izzi realized she had stopped mid-step, staring too long. Her pulse tripped hard. She tore her gaze away, but it was too late. The half-elf's eyes were already on her. Steady, unblinking, unreadable. "Can I help you, elf?" The words weren't curious. They were blunt, flat, as if he were already bored with the answer. His green eyes didn't waver, and though his tone was quiet, it carried the weight of someone entirely unamused at being observed. Izzi straightened, smoothing her sash with one hand, letting her most disarming smirk tug at her scarred lip. "Maybe I just thought you looked like you could use the company. Sitting here all brooding, glaring at your drink. Not a good look, you know." He tilted his head slightly, as though assessing a puzzle. "Then perhaps don't look." The dismissal was clean, without heat. He turned back to his glass. Izzi slid onto the stool beside him anyway, propping her chin on her hand, violet gray eyes glinting with mischief. "You know, most men at least try to pretend when a woman stares too long." The half-elf didn't look at her. "I'm not most men," she smirked, tilting her head. "You are a joy." That earned her nothing but the faintest flicker of an eyelid. She tried again, letting her gaze drop deliberately to the bandages wrapping his arm. "So, fashion statement? Or did you lose to someone better?" He set his glass down, voice level, cool. "Neither." Izzi laughed softly, though it caught a little at the edge. "And that means?" Finally meeting her eyes, his green stare was unblinking, steady. It's supposed to end the question. For the first time, her smile wavered. She covered it with another drink, then leaned closer, ears twitching faintly pink. "All right then, not the bandages. Maybe you'll tell me why you're here. Don't say it's for meeting new people." Something sharp lit in his gaze then, though his voice stayed calm. "Does it matter? Maybe," Izzi said, tilting her glass. "Because you're not the only one after the beast." That landed. His lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder, patronizing. He turned slightly toward her, his gaze raking her like a blade. "Oh, you are?" His tone was soft, condescending. You with your little daggers and your clever tongue? You think you'll walk into the mountains and come back with its head? Her ears burned hot, but she forced a smirk, refusing to flinch. Don't need to bring back its head, just need to put it down. He studied her for a long beat, the silence between them drawn taut as a bowstring. Then he leaned back, the faint glow of the runes on his left arm catching the lantern light. Whatever edge had surfaced slipped back behind the wall. Then watch yourself, he said, standing with smooth precision. He slid both broadswords into place across his back. These things will eat anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. Without another glance, he left the bar, the door closing behind him with a muted thud. Izzi stared at the empty space he'd occupied, smirk faded, her pulse quick and uneven. Saints, he had gotten under her skin. The door thudded shut behind him, leaving Izzi at the bar with her jaw tight and her ears flushed hot. She downed the rest of her wine in one swallow, setting the cup down with a little more force than she meant to. A shadow loomed at her side. Kaelen's voice, calm as ever, broke through. Who was that? Izzi let out a sharp exhale through her nose, smirk curling bitter. Competition, it would seem. Kaelen raised a brow but didn't press. He simply tipped his head toward the stairs. Together they made their way up the narrow wooden steps, boots thumping against boards worn thin by years of weary travelers. The room they found Horian in was not nearly as grand as Cerulea's rest. A single bed sat against the far wall, the sheets clean but plain, the window shuttered tight against the night air. A table with one chair stood in the corner, no more, no less. Horian was sprawled across the bed as though he owned it, boots tossed onto the floor, hands laced behind his head. He looked up as they entered, grin flashing. Ah, there you are. Was beginning to think you'd both been swallowed whole. Kaelen leaned against the table, arms crossed. Another hunter's here, after the griffin. That drew Horian upright, his grin broadening instead of dimming. Of course there is. A beast like that, half the damned countryside will be sniffing for its feathers. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, leaning forward. But here's the truth. Most of them are amateurs. Drunk mercs, green blades, or fools with more coin than sense. They'll blunder into the mountains, and the mountains will take them. Izzi folded her arms, still prickling from the half-elf's words. And if he isn't an amateur? Horian's brow arched, catching the heat in her tone, but he only chuckled. Then he'll make things more interesting. Still, griffins aren't kind beasts, and if it's truly one of those creatures, it'll take more than bravado to bring it down. Kaelen nodded once, steady. So, strategy. Strategy, Horian echoed, his grin sharpening into something more serious. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. First light, we find the trails. Feathers, tracks, blood, whatever crumbs it's left us. We move fast, before the others get too far ahead. His gaze flicked between them, bright and fierce. And when it comes to claws and wings, we stand together or we die separate. The room fell quiet but for the muffled murmur of the inn below. Izzi's daggers felt heavier at her hips, the weight of the half-elf's warning still lodged in her chest. The three of them sat in the dim inn room, the candle guttering low on the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence hummed with the weight of the task before them. Izzi broke it first, her arms still folded tight across her chest. These things will eat anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. Horian tilted his head, brow furrowing. What? Something he said. Her eyes narrowed at the memory of the man's cold tone, the certainty in it. The hunter I crossed downstairs. The way he spoke, it was like he knew more than he was letting on. She leaned back against the wall, fingers brushing the hilt of her dagger. If it is a griffin, we can't assume it's alone. There could be more, a nesting pair even. Kaelen grunted, but it wasn't disagreement. His scarred arms folded across his chest, steady gaze fixed on her. You're right, they don't mate often, but when they do, they guard the nest fiercely. If there's more than one, we'll need to be careful. Careful, Horian repeated with a dry laugh. You sound like old men planning a harvest. Still, his grin softened into something more serious as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. But you're right, stealth first. If we can track it quietly, maybe even catch it grounded, we'll have a chance to end it quick. Izzi nodded, her violet-gray eyes sharp in the flickering candlelight. No blundering into the mountains like fools. We move quiet, watch for signs. Feathers, claw marks, bones. We strike only when we have to. Kaelen shifted, his greatsword resting against the wall beside him, its hilt catching the faint glow. If it comes down to a fight, it'll be brute force. My blade, Horian's noise. You stay fast, Iz. Dart in, dart out, cut where it's weak. Claws, wings, throat, she murmured, already mapping it in her mind. Good, Horian said, his grin returning, though tempered now. We'll bleed it before it knows which way to strike. He clapped his hands together once, the sound sharp in the stillness. Simple plan, stealth until it fails, brute force when it does. And if there's more than one, then we adapt, Kaelen finished. Izzi's gaze lingered on the flame of the candle, words echoing still in her skull. These things will eat anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. She swallowed hard, not sure if she was more unsettled by his warning or the way it made her listen. Later, the room sank into silence. Horian had claimed the floor, his broad frame sprawled across a heap of blankets, one arm flung over his eyes, chest rising and falling with steady snores. Kaelen sat in the lone chair beside the bed, boots still on, his greatsword leaned within arm's reach. His head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed, though the faint twitch of his hand told Izzi he wasn't quite asleep. Izzi lay on the bed, sheets drawn to her waist, arms folded behind her head. The candle had burned itself down to a stub, shadows climbing high across the beams. She stared into them for a long while, the memory of green eyes and runes cutting through her thoughts like shards of glass. Kaelen, she whispered. One of his eyes cracked open, glinting in the dim light. She hesitated, then turned her head toward him. At the bar, I met someone, half-elf. Said he was here for the beast too. Kaelen's brow lifted slightly, though his voice stayed low and calm. Competition. More than that, Izzi murmured. He was different, cold, dismissive. He knew things, spoke like he already understood the beast better than anyone here. And the way he looked at me, her ears twitched, embarrassed. Like I was a child trying to play at something I didn't understand. Kaelen let out a slow breath, tilting his head back again. Let him think what he likes. Words don't win fights. We'll see how clever he is when steel sings. Izzi smiled faintly at that, though it faded quickly. Her mind wouldn't let go, the bandages spiraling up his arm, the silver cuff in his ear that matched her own, and most of all the runes curling across his left arm, pulsing faintly with life she couldn't read. She sighed softly, rolling onto her side. Saints. I wish Renlin were here. He could have read them, told me what they meant. Kaelen didn't answer, and after a while she realized his breathing had evened into sleep. She stayed awake, staring at the faint glow of the shutter's cracks, the man's words echoing in her skull. These things will eat anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. The sheets rustled as she buried herself deeper beneath them, but the thought lingered all the same, heavy as stone.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.